Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. It is 9 o'clock, so I think it's prudent to get started. We have a pretty packed schedule between now and 2:30, so thank you for taking time out of your Saturday. I am Rob Johnson. I'm from Northern Virginia Community College. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the college, and I'll be your technical slash Zoom host for the duration of today's event. So welcome to the fourth annual Native Plant Symposium, second virtual one. I hope you made the one last year, but if you didn't, just like last year, the recordings will be available for this one this year too. I would ask for patience from attendees that give us a few weeks to process those recordings and make them available, but as long as you're registered, you'll get a link to the recordings in the next few weeks. Here's our schedule. We're going to start with Matt Bright from Earth Sangha here in a few minutes as our keynote speaker. And then after that, we have 3 breakout sessions with multiple sessions in each one. And you can see the list on here. The only restriction from these breakout sessions is the landscape design track. You did need to pre-register for that one. And so if you did not pre-register for that one, please choose a different one. And you're welcome to choose any of the other 3 during each of these breakout sessions. And we'll go through once the keynote is done and we transition into breakout session number 1. There'll be a little bit of administration, technical administration to get that started. And we're here to assist you. There are, how many co-hosts do we have in the Zoom? About 10, maybe 12. And we're all here to help assist you moving into the breakout sessions. From a Zoom administration standpoint, everyone is muted. If you have technical difficulties, feel free to put them in the chat. I think you can chat directly to me or certainly to the host and co-host. All sessions are being recorded, including this one as the keynote. And I don't think participants currently have the ability to turn their video on. And then all breakout sessions will also be recorded. The chat remains open from a process standpoint. You can send your questions in to the host and co-hosts through the chat. Please keep that professional and respectful. And then due to the number of attendees, we're currently at 266 people in here. Please put any questions in the chat, and then your moderator in the breakout rooms will submit those verbally to the speaker, or if the speaker is able to monitor the chat, we can answer them that way. Chat session is also being recorded, so if we don't get to your question, that can be followed up later. At the conclusion of the 3rd breakout session, once everybody comes back to the main room, there is a Q&A period for about 30 minutes at 2 o'clock. There will be a survey link provided at the end if you're still here. Or it will come when we send the meeting follow-up with the recording. So feel free to provide any feedback about any component, any part of this event. Closed captioning live transcription is available for the keynote session, not for the breakout rooms. If you see on the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that looks like that with the CC and live transcript. You just select that, and then you'll see subtitles at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, like I said, send them in the chat to the host and co-host. It looks a little bit different than this, but hopefully everybody has the ability to see that in the chat. Again, I've mentioned this a couple times, there will be a recording at the end, all sessions are being recorded, and then the recording links will be provided at the end. So without further ado, let's move on to the keynote. It's my pleasure to welcome Matt Bright from Earth Sangha. He's the conservation manager at Earth Sangha. He is here to speak about natural plant community, native plants, and you. If you don't know, earthsangha.org is a local organization to Northern Virginia doing a lot of great work in ecological restoration. So without further ado, here's Matt.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction there. I'm just going to go ahead and get my screen shared here, and we will hop right into it. There we are. Can everyone see that okay?
So we're seeing you in presenter mode.
Okay, sorry, let me switch to How's that?
Perfect.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. So we'll be discussing a few things about our natural plant communities, some of our native plants, and how some of this work is that we've been doing on this can be applicable to things that you may be up to, whether those things are in a home garden, maybe you're volunteering at a schoolyard, or maybe you're a volunteer that works in parks in the region. Maybe you're going through a master naturalist program, things like that. Just by way of sort of brief introduction into the sort of work that we've been doing, I've worked at the Earth Sangha now for just over 10 years. And at the Earth Sangha, we operate the Wild Plant Nursery. That's our largest program. We started that in 2001. It's been a partnership with Fairfax County Park Authority, as well as working with other agencies within the region. And we grow around 300 species or so, all from seed or spore that we go out and we collect ourselves with permission at rates that are sustainable for local populations. And then we grow those plants back out and get them back onto restoration sites. In the last few years here, we've been distributing upwards of 50,000 plants, and that runs the full range. We have ferns, we have grasses, we have all sorts of forbs, that is sort of flowering kind of wildflower things, as well as tree and shrub seedlings. And because we get to do all this seed collection on our own, we have a lot of hands-on experience being out in these sorts of natural plant communities that we're going to talk about today. So one thing is that we should kind of get on the same page about what a plant community is. So I've included here in this first bullet point a kind of scientific kind of definition that we can use here, that we have. It's a group of plant species that sort of show up on their own within a given habitat. One thing to keep in mind is that, these sort of plant communities, one is that they're well described. So we'll talk about some of the data sets that allow us to understand, particularly within the state of Virginia, because we have very, very good resources about what our plant communities look like across the entire state, but that they're also predictable, right? That if we know something about what the landscape looks like, and the sort of vegetation that's there, we can use that level of understanding to tell us what else should be there, right? What other things might we find if we look a little bit closer? So for example, in most of our mesic, that is medium moisture to dry meadows, you're probably going to see a mix of goldenrods like we see here, as well as bone sets, members of the genus Eupatorium. We can also have, sort of predictions about what sort of grasses and things that we may see on those conditions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, based on that rather, complicated scientific definition of what a plant community is, it may sound a little bit complicated, right? That if we're replanting an area, that if we're concerned about the sort of native plants that we're getting back out into an area, that this seems, maybe a little bit overwhelming. But fundamentally, the same question that we're asking ourselves about, what sort of plant community do we want here, is the same sort of question that I think a lot of gardeners, a lot of people who work with plants think about in terms of just right plant, right place. And what we're really sort of broadening that out to, or what are the right plants, plural, for this place, and how should we go about getting them back in? The other thing to consider is, when we're looking at some of these plant communities, whether we're looking at specific ones or we can back out and look at these broader sort of categories. So why don't we jump ahead here and look at a couple of actual sort of, plant communities. So these are the sort of common names for a few actual plant communities that we find in our area. So one of the most common forest types that we see is this thing called a northern coastal plain Piedmont mesic mixed hardwood forest. So a lot of times people will just talk about a mesic mixed forest, and that's sort of what they're talking about. You'll get a lot of beech in these things. You'll see tulip tree, you'll see both white and red oak. You'll see holly in the understory, and you'll probably see a good amount of Christmas fern in the ground cover there. And then we have other common things. We have acidic oak hickory forests. We have, small stream floodplain forests. And there are a few different types of those that are defined by the sorts of regions in which we may find them. And, indeed, if you're an ecologist and you're working in a natural area, you're often thinking about these very specific sort of plant communities. But we don't need to think with that degree of precision when we're working in, at home, in a schoolyard, in a highly disturbed area. But we may be making those same sorts of assessments, right? So if you have a very, very steep slope and it's dry, you might want to start looking at our sort of dry to dry mesic sort of forests, the sorts of things like an acidic oak hickory forest. And we might want to draw from that the sorts of structure that forest may have, right? That the understory, would have some trees and shrubs, but as you get to the herbaceous layer, it may be fairly open, right? You may just have leaf litter for large patches, and that may be a sort of normal sort of landscape, right? And as you get into a floodplain, you get into a flatter area, so the topography is changing. You're near some source of water. There may be standing water after a heavy rain. There you're going to see a heavier sort of herbaceous growth. So if you can see the photo, for example, in this background, off to the right, you're in a floodplain forest here, and you can see that kind of dense sort of understory. There are a mix of sedges, there are a mix of wildflowers here. And as you get up to the slope here off to the left, you're beginning to see a transition into this sort of rolling landscape that's more typical of a mesic mixed hardwood forest. And there you can see that herbaceous layer thins out, right? That you don't have the same level of sort of, dense sort of green growing things all over there. It's leaf litter, it's open. And so you can see that transition between these different plant communities here, and indeed how that translates into an actual difference on the ground. The reason why, and I think this isn't, necessarily news to everyone here, or at least hopefully it's not, but that the reason why, thinking about our remnant forests, our remnant grasslands and meadows with this amount of specificity matters, especially in urban and suburban environment. Is broadly that a lot of the alterations we've done to the landscape to accommodate all the people here and the infrastructure that the people here need has been broadly destructive for the plants and the wildlife that depend on them. What research just coming out the last few years has found is that about 30% of bird species, or excuse me, 30% of total amount of native birds within North America are gone over the last 50 years. So comparing population levels from now to the 1970s, we've lost about 30% of them. If you look at a lot of our flying insects, we're seeing tremendous declines. In some cases, we've lost a majority of the number of flying insects that have been around over similar time periods. And those are studies that have been done around the world, both in tropical areas and in temperate areas, North America, Europe, Asia, you name it, they're seeing the same thing. And what's driving a lot of these things, it's not yet climate change, though certainly that will play a role in the future, but a lot of it are the same drivers of environmental degradation that we're used to seeing. Increasing amounts of development, which necessitates or tends to cause just wholesale destruction or modification to our habitats, and also the spread of invasive plants, which is often something that crops up after some disturbance event. What this research, this chart on the right has found, this was research done by Desiree Narango and also Doug Tallamy, who wrote Bringing Nature Home, a book you should read if you haven't yet. And what they found by looking at a Carolina chickadee as a sort of model, as something that otherwise tolerates being around people and being in our yards, that if you don't have 70% cover of native plants, right, that is, from an aerial view, if your yard is not 70% native plants, that chickadees are not able within a year to raise enough chicks to replace the two parents, right? So we have a population that is in decline. When you get up to 70 and above, they begin to raise more chicks to adulthood, and you begin to see these populations tick upwards. And that primarily is tied to the number of insects that are able to eat those native plants, which then these birds are able to feed to their young. So 96% or so of our native birds, whether they eat seed or fruit or whatever as adults, will be eating primarily native insects to feed their young. And most of these insects are not particularly charismatic. So if we want to hit this 70% sort of threshold here, we have to do it in our yards, in schoolyards, on private property, in large part because even though we have fantastic park systems within Northern Virginia and beyond throughout the DC area, they just simply don't have enough land to get us to 70% or the sort of 50% that say ecologists like E.O. Wilson say we need to hit. You can see the numbers here. We're below 10% for park property for some of the biggest jurisdictions in the DC area. And that includes things like parking lots and rec centers and jungle gyms and things for kids, valid things that parks need to provide as well. So if we want to stave off these sort of wildlife declines that we're seeing, we need to do it at home as well. One of the big reasons why we want to think about restoring a plant community is sort of thinking about a natural assemblage of plants, the sort of things that naturally grow together in the wild, and trying to get those things back out into gardens, into disturbed spaces, is because it allows us to mimic a natural environment and drive some of this sort of uplift that we want to see. So you can think about this concept of driver and passenger species, right? So we have, for example, this great photo taken at Lake Fairfax Park of one of our pink lady slipper orchids. This is such a great example of a passenger species. Orchids, for the first year or two of their lives, exist as parasites on mycorrhizal fungi, and they need to have the right tree canopy, not just because of the shade, but because that tree canopy creates the environment for the mycorrhizae fungi in the soil to thrive, right? And then the orchid needs to use that fungi to thrive itself, right? So you can see that because of the presence of common oak species, and you can see some white oak in the canopy there, we've brought these other things along. That's not to say that if you plant an oak seedling, you can immediately have orchids popping up in your yard. Some of these things are more challenging than others, but these passengers, we don't have to think about them as just fungi and plants. But a lot of the sort of wildlife that we want to protect are also these sort of passengers, right? If there's this sort of other side of the coin, you hear, if you build it, they will come. But you have to go out and begin to create that habitat. And to do that, you're going to need to understand what some of the most common kind of species are, the sort of things that are these kind of drivers for these communities. By getting the right sort of driver species out there, these sort of dominant things that tend to make up the bulk of some of our plant communities that are, that you might want to get back onto a site. We can do a number of things that are sort of important, both from a sort of horticultural standpoint in terms of what you're planting, but also from a standpoint of the wildlife benefit, right? So if we use that kind of right plant, right place mentality, we can get plants in there that are going to be happy, that are going to attract wildlife, that knows that it's in the right spot for it, and that those species you plant will eventually drop seed and create another generation moving forward, which is the sort of thing that we want to see on the restoration site, and can be great in the garden too, especially as, if those are things that you want more of, you don't have to go back and buy more pots of it. You will have it sort of spreading throughout the garden on its own. The other advantage of looking at some of these plant communities in terms of not just the species that are there, but also how they arrange themselves. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but thinking about the sort of structure that we might expect, the density in a ground layer in rich and more moist areas may be quite different from the density of a ground layer in a dry area with very acidic soil. But as we improve our understanding of what plant communities look like, it tells us when we need to plant more densely or plant less densely. So the example that I like to sort of point out is that a lot of folks, when they're looking at a shady understory in a sort of forest fragment in their backyard, they may want to have wall-to-wall herbaceous plants. And depending on the sort of plant community that you have there, which is dictated by moisture, by the soil types, by what's already growing there, it may simply not be able to support that. And it may be a waste of effort to keep putting in more and more plants and exceeding the density that could be naturally supported there. And the flip side of that is when you're planting in a full sun area and you're thinking about things that maybe would grow in a sort of meadow community, if you want wide spacing and to see mulch in between everything, again, that's not a normal arrangement for our meadows, which are usually very, very dense, inches between things once they're established and grown in. And so, keeping open spots in between is, again, this sort of uphill sort of fight where you're moving against what the sort of successional forces in that site want to do. So I realized that was a lot of information, and we moved fairly rapidly through some of that. And I want to just reiterate that we're going to talk about some of the resources that are there. But again, to think about sticking to some of our general species, things that pop up a lot, right? If we get a plant that occurs in a lot of different communities and a lot of different habitats, there are a lot of right places for this species to go back into. And indeed, one of the advantages from the restoration side, from the conservation sort of mindset, is that a lot of these common species have co-evolved. That's a term that Doug Tallamy uses to explain the kind of close relationship between native plants and the sort of wildlife that depend on them. But a lot of these species have co-evolved then to support a lot of wildlife because they're all over the place. And so, a nice example for a lot of our meadows might be something like a Rudbeckia species, something like a black-eyed Susan or an orange coneflower. And as we think about the sort of wildlife that people want to protect, here we have a monarch caterpillar eating some of the milkweed at our nursery. We often are thinking about the sort of specific needs of these species, right? The sort of specific plants that they need to coexist with. And in this case, obviously, they need to, as young, eat milkweeds. And that's a necessary component of their life cycle. But simply just having some milkweed in the garden and nothing else is not sufficient to support the monarch for its full life cycle, right? So they may need to nectar on other species. And in fact, we find that they do. So for instance, they tend to prefer goldenrods as a fall nectar source, especially as they are migrating south. And not only is the goldenrod then important for the monarch, but there are a whole bunch of interesting other wildlife species that are going to depend on these goldenrods. So for instance, a lot of our specialist bees may make use of goldenrods or other common sort of species. If you're interested in those relationships, you can listen to Sam Drogi's talk today in one of the breakout sessions as he talks about some of these things. But also these goldenrods will have seed that some birds will want to eat over the winter. And indeed, a lot of the grasses that we find in our meadows will be good structure here that, most of our monarchs want to pupate off of their host plant and get onto something else to pupate and hide. And those things provide other benefits as well. There are some insects that are directly hosted by grasses There are moths that only want to eat some of our grasses. And so you find that by broadening this out, for instead of just planting just milkweed, but planting constituents of a common sort of meadow along with your milkweed, that now you're providing all sorts of ecological benefit to a wide suite of insects and birds and other things that want to be in that habitat. And what's fascinating about that is we don't need to do that specific research to do that, right? So we don't need to look up every insect or bird that may come and visit this sort of meadow garden, because we've used a plant community and we've used a sort of planting palette that reflects the sorts of things that grow together in the wild. You're naturally creating that sort of habitat that's appealing to those sort of species that need to make use of that. The other sort of caveat I like to sort of remind people too is that there's often a lot of fascinating diversity occurring within our parks or within your yard that we're not directly able to observe unless you really, really get out there with a magnifying glass or, flipping over logs and things like that. So, when you create, these sort of communities there and you get a diverse assemblage of sort of appropriate native plants back in, there are a whole lot of things that may be occurring. And a few of those things may be within the soil, they may be microscopic, but that are nonetheless important sort of ecological components, and that this may be happening all around you. And so, for an example of that, of a few of these things, is that that there are studies that have found that these interactions exist all around us, and they're always adding to our understanding of what our plant communities are doing. But I think this top one is probably the most interesting one from a restoration perspective, that also is useful for sort of home gardeners. And that is that by planting things in a sort of heterogeneous mix, right, all mixed up, but in the right sort of community structure, you actually see better survivability under kind of deer herbivory pressure. And that's because the things that the deer don't like are mixed in with the things that the deer do like. And they tend not to, or the things that the deer don't like tend to shield a bit the things that the deer do want to eat, and they help them kind of get fully established and able to withstand that sort of pressure. The other thing I'd like to sort of point out here is that there are a lot of areas like this very steep slope that's dangerous and difficult to mow, or was dangerous and difficult to mow before we helped the city of Alexandria replant it, where the human needs overlap with the sort of conservation needs of the site. And there's also good research, like this article by Domshin, published in 2019, just a couple of years ago, that found that sites, even very tenuously connected, right, by very, very narrow strips of land in their experiment, had 14% more species in them than sites that were not connected, even by these very, very small, narrow, drawn out corridors. And so by creating more sort of backyard habitat, by piecing together little fragments of meadow or urban forest through your own sort of planting, you are contributing to creating some of these corridors that will help our existing sort of parks and natural areas resist disruption and to be healthier in the long term. Of course, we can't, replant everything and, wholly rebuild everything from scratch. And that's why I think it's so important that areas that look very, very healthy, for instance, like this stand of white oak seedlings at Lake Fairfax Park, in some areas, the right solution is not to plant anything. When you have a really intact community, it's healthy, it's responding well, you have what they call an intact seed bank. These sites are probably best left to their own devices. If you have this sort of stuff in your backyard, maybe the best thing you could do is allow it to expand, but you may not need to go in there and do a whole lot. And in some sites, even where there is significant disturbance, so this is Dyke Marsh, a National Park Service property along the Potomac here. And this site was one where they had worked for a number of years getting rid of a very, very thick amount of invasives. And a lot of these species you see here, like the bear's foot with the yellow flowers, the blue mist flower, the yellow passion flower, all of these things came back out of the seed bank of their own accord. We did plant some other things in there, and those came up well too. But it goes to show that even a degraded site may have a lot of sort of remnants of that plant community that used to exist there, as seed, as rhizome still living in the soil, waiting for a chance to come back up. So often if you're working, this may not be the case if you have a brand new house and everything got bulldozed, but for older development, if you're volunteering in parks, you may find that the best way to understand what sort of plant community should be there, or that used to be there, is simply removing some of the stressors that are degrading the site, stepping back and allowing things to come back up, and beginning to figure out what those things are. And again, the best things to kind of work on are some of our most degraded, heavily disturbed sites, because indeed pretty much anything you do on an area where a bulldozer is just run over, excavators have been working, is going to be a big improvement if you can get some of those native plants in there. So I realize that's a lot of introduction, and now we're going to begin looking at some of the actual data that we have on plant community. But before we do that, I just wanted to introduce two terms to you. So one is constancy, and constancy is expressed as a percent. So it's what percentage of test plots, of plots where ecologists went to look at specific plant communities, did this species occur in, right? So we may have ones with very, very high constancy that maybe they occurred in 100% of the test plots, or 75 or something, so that we see over and over again. And then we have cover, and that's if you were to look at an aerial view of a plant community, what percentage of it would be made up, like how much of it is covered by this species. And it's important to note that if you were to add up all the covered percentages from a plant community, you would be way up above 100%, because you have multiple layers, right? So if you have a stand of all tulip tree, that's 100% cover for your canopy, but then you have shrubs underneath it, right? And then you look at how much area that is taking up, and then you have things growing on the forest floor. So you're looking at, how much area does that take up? But by looking at these two sort of variables, constancy and cover, we can kind of break up plants in the plant community, the sort of actors there, by whether they're high cover or low cover, or high constancy and low constancy. And these things describe a little bit about the sort of life history of the plant, or how we may find them, right? So things that are high cover and high constancy, we see all the time, often in big stands. But things that are, say, low cover but high constancy, you might see frequently, but maybe just a single plant, and then there's a gap, and then you see another one a few feet away, and then there's another one. So you see it over and over again, but it isn't just saturating an area. And a high cover and low constancy plant, you may find in big, large stands all in one go, but then go some time without seeing one. And you may find that, in some of the fragmentary habitat, maybe you don't have a stand of this at all. So some things that you might see like this move about by rhizome or stolon, or otherwise create kind of big clonal stands. And things that are low cover and low constancy are simply not major constituents of that plant community. That may be because they don't occur with very high frequency. Some of them may be naturally rare or uncommon, or some of them may just be sort of interlopers in a specific community, and they may operate as higher cover or higher constancy plants in other community types. So let's go ahead and take a look then at some of our other resources. So one of the first resources I want to point you to is one that we've put together. I actually wrote all of this myself. This is our native plant compendium at earthsangha.org. And it is a very text-heavy presentation. I realize that, but I wanted to get as much detail in here as possible. You can, of course, kind of scroll through and look at this on your own. It is a living document, so I continue to try and update this. But I want to point out that we have a few lists that you can kind of find in here. And I really try and highlight some of these great sort of generalist species. And what you'll find too is that I've bolded some of these that have been highlighted by Doug Tallamy's research as keystone genera for supporting the larval stage of moths and butterflies, because those are particularly of value to our wildlife, especially our birds that need that to feed their chicks. So those things are bolded there. And these are species that you see in a wide range of plant communities. So we have them by sort of canopy trees. You can look at understory trees and shrubs, things like that. We also have a few of these for specific sort of habitats here. So we have 2 full sun lists, which are meant to be analogs for our successional meadows. So we have a sort of medium moisture to dry one, and then we have a kind of moist to wet. And so we've broken it down by what sort of grasses you might see, what sort of wildflowers. And then, if they're sort of successional trees and shrubs, you might want to sort of space out there. We have that as well. And we also have a few things for very specific plant communities. These are, again, I tried to choose ones that you might encounter fairly frequently in our region. And again, I've broken them down by those 4 categories that we talked about in that last slide, these sort of high constancy, high cover, high or low constancy sort of things. And all of this is cross-referenced with our own plant list. So I'm not including species that we don't grow, because that may not be of particular value to you, but we will look at some other introductions. So I realize that is a very, very detailed take. It's a lot of information, but we'll cover some other resources too that are a little bit easier. One last thing before I duck away is I wanted to note too that for every species we grow, I did write up just a few lines about the sort of habitats where you might see these things. So if you have a question about a specific thing, you can refer back to the notes about where in our experience we're seeing these things in the wild. So if all that seems like way too much, I definitely recommend then checking out the Plant Nova Natives site, and they have a section on plant communities. And one of the great things I think that they've done here is begin to introduce sort of this connection between the topography of the landscape and these sorts of communities that you may see, right? So as you move from a lowland area adjacent to a stream where you might see a floodplain community, and you start to move upslope at the top of these slopes, you might find areas that are dominated by these sort of oak heath plant community or chestnut oak dominated communities that really thrive in some of our driest, sort of rockiest sort of soils. And then if you scroll down, there's again, a lot of references to other great resources here, but also, some great sort of hand-drawn resources about, broadly speaking, where these sort of physiogeographic provinces, where does the Triassic Basin pop up in our region, because some of our interesting plant communities need to be in the Triassic Basin because of those sort of base-rich sort of soils. So this is another really, really great resource, and it's much more concise than the work that I've done. So I definitely think that this is a fantastic thing to look into. Then I want to point out that we have some interesting work here done by Glenn Tobin. And Glenn was recently highlighted by the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation for some of his conservation work. So there's Glenn at a site at Powhatan Springs Park, where he's been working to catalog some of the natural plant communities and use that to guide the restoration work there. And he set up this fantastic website, novanaturalcommunity.com. I definitely recommend kind of looking through it. It's a very, very data-driven sort of thing. And you can see some of the data that he's collected, not just publicly available data, but also data that he's gone out and collected at Powhatan Springs. And it's definitely worth kind of looking through it. And he also has a very fantastic research to begin to give you the information you need to begin distinguishing between some of these plant communities. And we don't have the time today to go through all of this, but this is all research or work that's available on his website. I definitely recommend using some of this to begin to understand how this works. There is also a dichotomous key if that's the sort of thing that you want to go through. But this can really help to begin to kind of read the landscape. We're very lucky too in Virginia to have this great sort of natural heritage program from Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. This is where the raw data that Glenn and I have used comes from. So they have all this information readily available. It's broken down by this kinds of areas. So we have upland sort of habitats or tidal wetlands and things like that. So you can click through and then see specific natural communities here. There's a sort of plain English description of the sort of things that you have, both in terms of the species and the kind of topography. There's a photo that kind of gives you a sense about what these things look like. And then you can see the actual areas where they surveyed. So these dots are not the only places where these plant communities occur. This is our mesic mixed hardwood forest that we began the talk talking about, one of our most common plant communities. But these are where they surveyed, and this occurs throughout the coastal plain and the Piedmont of Virginia, very, very common. And then if you wanted to, you could look at the actual sort of data. You can download this as a spreadsheet, so I can kind of show you real quick what you're looking at. Again, it's very, very detailed. It's all the species here and then every test plot, and you can see how frequently they found them. That data is, can be hard to parse, which is why Glenn created his website. It's why we created our compendium, but it's a very, very great resource. The sorts of easier to digest material, I think, that some of us have created here wouldn't exist without all the hard work of the ecologists here at Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. And then if you're farther afield, if you're not in Virginia, you can use NatureServe Explorer. And this catalogs things, I believe, around the world, certainly around the US. And you can search either for species or for ecosystems. So you could type in, say, Quercus rubra. And not only will you pull up, you can get a sort of information and occurrence about that specific species, but you can see the sort of communities that this thing occurs in. So I've pulled up here, this is if you were to search Quercus rubra, you get all this sort of information and all these different communities it occurs in. And you can kind of go through and click through. Here we are again with our friend, the mesic mixed hardwood forest. And here again, you can see from NatureServe, it tells you whether these plant communities are, imperiled globally or not, or they're secure, the sorts of things that you have inside of them, the kind of species that you see, and more sort of descriptions of it, where these things sort of occur. So, that's a really great resource if you can't apply the Department of Conservation and Recreation data set. And so a couple last sort of thoughts here as we get kind of towards the end and the beginning of our question and answer thing is that I realize that this is a lot of information. This is a lot of data kind of coming at you. I hope that I've sort of set the stage to introduce you to some of this and that you feel interested enough to continue to look at some of these resources that are available online to you. But if you've been looking at all this and your head's spinning a little bit, a plug for going out and getting some of our generalist dominant sort of species back out into the landscape. This is a close-up photo of Euonymus americanus. Hearts of bursting is one of the common names. Strawberry bush is another common name. This is something that grows in a wide variety of our forests here as an understory shrub. It's a fantastic thing to get back into the landscape, and it's been broadly suppressed because deer like to eat it too much, and we're losing it in areas where we have deer overabundance problems like we do in the DC area. But if you can get these generalists back out into an area, you can get them back out into a lot of different right places. And because they are common, or in this case, were once very common, there's a lot of wildlife that's happy to make use of it. So you will get interesting things coming to the flowers. You'll get birds making use of the fruit or the seed, or using, in this case, the sort of very dense cover that a mature one affords to have nests or to hide from predators in. And so the more we can use some of these common species, the better off we are in terms of the sort of ecological value. And of course, that's not to say that we can't use some of the more interesting, less common species, but we want to make sure that we have some of these common things kind of already established. And indeed, sometimes when you're working on a site, and you just kind of have to do your best. So this is an image taken at Marie Butler Levin Preserve in Fairfax County. That is a bathtub set in concrete, ringed by stone on a rather kind of steep slope here. So what we have here is not something that resembles much of a natural community at all. Bathtubs don't naturally occur on slopes within the kind of fall line, kind of Piedmont coastal plain area. And indeed, it traps a lot of water and it stays pretty much wet year round. So what we did here is we planted out some constituents that you might see in a pond. So here we have some native blue flag iris. So we take advantage of those little niches that we can find. And indeed, when you're working in an urban, suburban environment, especially on sites that are badly degraded, that maybe have some kind of ongoing disturbance, you're going to have to do the best you can with what you got. And I think it's also a reminder that, we spent a lot of this discussion talking about all the important sort of natural and ecological components. And I think that we need to bring those elements to the forefront of our discussions about how we manage our natural spaces, or indeed our anthropogenic spaces as well. But that there is room, especially for those of you in a home garden, for that element of design. And I think there are a number of speakers that today that will talk to you about how you can incorporate an attractive, aesthetically pleasing sort of design to your landscape, while also keeping an eye on the sort of ecological value that getting native plants back into the landscape, especially if it's possible to get them back into those sort of natural arrangements, can have. So that sort of concludes the presentation portion here. I think I've left a good amount of time for questions and answers, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I will be around at the end. I know that there's like a 30-minute question and answer thing for everybody, so I'll stick around then too. And yeah, I'm ready for any questions that people want to share. Thanks so much, everyone.
And thank you, Matt. You did an amazing job. A tremendous amount of information. A lot of the chat is regarding the access to the recordings and the resources. So yes, everyone, give us a week or so, but we will have, to all registrants, you'll receive a link to all of the recordings, all the information. I'm happy to do that. Matt, you did an amazing job. Really not a lot of precise questions. Actually, some are popping up now. Somebody has 5 acres of pasture, but they want to turn into a natural forest. However, I'm 73 and need help. Do you have any ideas or resources that could help?
Yes, so there are a few things that we can do when we're thinking about a sort of natural plant community concept, right? And one of these big things that we can think about is the concept of succession, right? So a lot of these communities are not static, right? They're in flux, especially after disturbance. They go through a series of kind of changes that we call succession. And so one of the things that you can do thinking about this successional change is a technique that ecologists and restorationists use when tackling large sites, but I think it's applicable to a kind of 5-acre sort of medium-sized to large yard as well, called applied nucleation. And the idea with a sort of applied nucleation planting is that you don't plant the entire site that you want to see restored, but instead you target specific areas, you plant densely. In some cases, you may want to put up a deer exclosure fence, even just temporarily to keep some of the deer out. So you can pick specific locations within your 5 acres. You might want to choose some that are across a gradient, right? So if you're on a slope, if one area is wet to dry, and plant a smaller section of those out pretty densely. And what researchers found that tends to do is it attracts wildlife to that site. And that wildlife and the establishment of those plants tends to distribute the seed from it. And it tends to drive in, because the wildlife moves seed around as well, drive in sort of plant species, even ones that you didn't plant in. And so over the long term, you get this movement towards a more sort of mature kind of plant community, a more diverse plant community across a larger site, while just planting in these sort of smaller portions.
Okay, very good. I think this is also something every challenge, every restoration person deals with. Somebody has 10 acres that were logged, and of course now they have bushes growing in. So trying to balance that, the natural flora, but then how do you thin out and manage the invasive species or the things that you don't want there?
So one big, we talked about this idea of driver and passenger sort of species. And, again, that isn't a static definition either. Some things that are drivers in one circumstance may be passengers in another. But in a lot of cases, invasive species can be drivers on a site, and they're sort of negative drivers. They make it worse. And so one of the things that you can do if you do see natural regeneration of sort of trees and shrubs that you want to see of the sort of native plants coming back, going through and just focusing your efforts wholesale on the removal of the invasives that are coming in and allowing that sort of natural succession to take place might be the best way to sort of allocate the limited time and resources that you can devote to a bigger site like that.
Excellent. I think your hearts of bursting picture has people very interested in planting that now, but what do you suggest people do when there are deer that are heavily present?
So I'm a big fan of putting cages up. They make commercial sort of tree protector tubes, but for shrubs, often these things are too narrow. We do make our own. So we buy a couple of U-posts. You can just get them from any hardware store. And then we use 2x4-inch welded wire fencing. I like to use that because it lasts a good long time. I have fencing outside my house here that I've put around individual trees and shrubs. That's been in place for 10 plus years and is looking fine. It's doing its job. It's keeping deer off of it. Again, it's going to depend on how many deer you have in your particular neighborhood, if they come to your yard or not. The reason I highlight that is because I think that a lot of our fragmentary parks, especially in the DC area, that we have a lot of deer, and we're beginning to lose some of these once common species that deer really, really want to eat. So to the extent that you as a homeowner, as a gardener, can put some of those things back in, and you're willing to tolerate looking at a bit of fencing to protect it, that you're probably having an outsized positive impact in both conserving that species and recreating useful habitat for the sorts of wildlife that depend on it.
Excellent. So one of the common successional sequences we have here is Juniperus virginiana, or red cedar, is an early successional for us, but as we've often seen, oftentimes underneath it, it's very devoid, or also a good space for invasives. What are your thoughts about a normal successional, but kind of opening up an area to an invasive species?
I think that's a fascinating question. I think it sort of gets to this this idea that you really have to grapple with these sites on an individual basis, right? And so it can help to have a target. Sometimes we think about those in restoration as a reference site. So a similar community, maybe with similar conditions, but that is in a more pristine state. So one of the things that you see there when you get a lot of that red cedar, Juniperus virginiana kind of coming up, left to their own devices, that you may get a very, very dense stand that doesn't have a whole lot else but red cedar. And again, this is a decision that you have to make about how you're managing your site and what you want it to look like. You could manage towards something that looks more like a successional old field, and that may require some of the removal of the red cedar and establishment of, say like herbaceous constituents of these successional meadows, so goldenrods, bone sets, little blue stem, broom sedge, and those sorts of things. Now, that obviously entails the removal of some native plants, which is why I think it's important to have a reference site and to know where you're going. But indeed, this is work that ecologists and restorationists do. There's work like that being done at Fairfax County Park Authority to try and manage for big open meadows out in the western part of the county, things like, say, Elk Lick or Poplar Ford Park, where we actually have a planting, dormant season planting next week. If anyone wants to join, I think we have some volunteer slots open. And for some of those, because it's the only area where in Fairfax County, where some of the meadows aren't narrow strips of land, they want to manage it to be entirely open to attract some of the wildlife that needs a large open kind of meadow interior space where there isn't a lot of habitat like that within Fairfax County. So again, this is sort of a management question about what you want the site to look like. What are the kind of restoration goals? That's not to say that a dense stand of red cedar is bad. It's just a different sort of plant community. But you as the landowner, as the restorationist, have to make that decision. But again, there are a lot of folks that can help make those decisions. We can help with that at Earth Sangha if you need us to kind of weigh in, but I'm sure there are other ecologists where you're located who are happy to help too.
Excellent, and thank you for the plug, and I want everybody to know that there are numerous opportunities to volunteer. I recommend you reach out to your either soil and water districts or your master gardener, cooperative extension services, or Earth Sangha, because that is a great way to learn about native plants. All of them are out there doing that work. So we have another question regarding somebody has 25 acres of woods and overrun with English ivy. I can just imagine how horrible that must be. What are your thoughts about using goats to help remove invasives?
I haven't worked with goats personally. What I've heard, I did know some folks who have. At least the anecdotes that they told me was that it is not as passive as you would think, that you do need to kind of be on top of that. And they did find that, there were native species that the goats seemed to want to eat first before some of the invasives. So you do have to understand kind of what's already there, and that there are some risks involved too. There is some trampling of the soil. Again, the folks that work with the goats hands-on often understand these things and kind of walk you through it. But I don't have a lot of experience on that myself.
Okay. I think to round it up, and if you could give your thought, because a lot of our participants are owners of sort of suburban lots. You have some sort of basics in beginning. You have this small corner of your yard. Are there a couple of basic ideas that you could give everyone? Things of like diversity and soil prep and different ideas.
So I think one of the big things is, working with what you got, trying to do as little amendment to the soil as possible is probably good. This isn't the, I don't think most horticulturists are telling, folks to double dig out, planting holes and things like that. I would say that, in this sort of broadly speaking urban suburban context, one of the best bang for the buck things that you can do is to plant an oak tree somewhere on your property. Even if you already have mature oak canopy or other native canopy on your property, most of these things, you have a mature tree and then nothing else kind of coming up. This is setting the stage for 40, 50, 80 years down the road. There is evidence that these things improve property values as well. People like to have trees. And that oaks really bang for the buck, are some of the most productive native plants in terms of supporting a really wide range of wildlife, from insect to birds to even our mammal species. And the leaf litter is actually really important to supporting a whole bunch of things that are happening in the soil or right at the soil surface. So if you have the space for it, if you have the right habitat, and what's great is that we have a lot of generalist oaks that occur in a very, very wide range of areas, things like white oak and red oak, assuming you have the space for it, can get planted in almost any condition we see naturally around here.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions. We are going to stay on track here. Again, really thank you, Matt. Some very, a lot of compliments in here, a lot of tremendous information. And I hope everybody spends the rest of the day enjoying a lot about native plants.
Right. Thanks so much, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so this is Rob Johnson again, back as your technical host. So breakout session 1 starts in 5 minutes. I'm going to open the breakout rooms, and you are welcome to join, with the exception again of landscape design. You're welcome to join any of the other 3 breakout rooms. If you're unable to, once I open them, you'll see a button at the bottom. You should see a button at the bottom of your screen. To allow you to pick a breakout room. I think it has 4 squares in it. And then you can select yourself to join. If you have difficulty with that, feel free to put in the chat which room you would like to go to, and we'll do our best to move you as quickly as possible. Again, apologies for the leaf blower in the background. If you don't see the option for the breakout room at the bottom, please just put in the chat which room you'd like to go to, and I can move you there.
Hey, Rob. Yeah, I'm not getting an option for breakout rooms either.
Which room do you need to be in?
Well, I need to be in Meadows. This is Jess.
Yep, hang on. There you go.
Okay, thank you. But I'm not sure the other participants are able to. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot that have joined.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
But I'm getting direct messages too. So hang on.
It's Ginny and
Okay.
Cullen. I'm supposed to present, and I can't. I don't see an option to join. I'm in the climate chaos room.
Okay. But that one is not until later.
No, it's at 10:05. What backyard gardeners can do to stop climate chaos.
Oh, sorry. Session 1. I apologize.
Yeah, just FYI, Rob, I can't get any kind of option here for a breakout room.
Julie, which one
Okay.
do you want to go to?
Climate chaos.
So there are these little arrows next to the breakout rooms. So at the top it says unassigned. If you click just to the left of that, it should you should be able to close that, and then you can see the other breakout rooms, and then you can click to join those. So I don't, if that makes sense to everybody. If it doesn't, I apologize.
No, I think I'm not. Oh, I'm just not sure what a participant sees, but
Right.
Could you repeat that, Jess?
Well, it just changed. So what I just said is no longer relevant. So now I can't join the breakout rooms either. But yeah, I had
Oh, who pushed the, so somebody has closed the breakout rooms.
I don't think that was me.
This is Kirsten, and I still can't figure out how to join the breakout room.
So we're gonna have to start over. Breakout rooms will close in 10 seconds. So hang on a second.
Okay, our apologies, everyone.
My name is not on the list of names to join the breakout room.
Okay, so I open all rooms.
Yep, so apologies, everybody. So we're gonna reopen the rooms. And again, you should see somewhere in the bottom row, if you don't see it, there should be a 3-dot thing that says more. That should allow you to choose a breakout room to go to. And again, if you don't see that, put in the chat and can move you as fast as possible.
Your name is not on the list. How do you join?
I'll put you in the
Thank you.
landscape room. Hang on.
Appreciate it.
If you are still in the main room and you need to move, your best bet is to send your requested breakout room in the chat to everyone. I can see the ones that have sent it to me directly, and I'm moving those people. But the co-hosts are, I think, they're still co-host here. They can also move you.
Rob, it's Valerie. The breakout rooms are opened for me.
Which one do you need to be in?
Landscape design, please.
Did you get, Valerie, did you get a pop-up? There you go. So I think you're gone. Is there another co-host still here? Hi, for those still in the main room, I'm moving as fast as I can to move people into their requested room. Again, if you're able to see a option at the bottom with that says more or has 3 dots, then you may be able to click that to access the breakout rooms. The only exception is to what I just said is that if you did not pre-register for the landscape design, you need to pick a different one. And again, moving as fast as I can. All breakout rooms sessions will be recorded and then provided to all registered attendees at the end or in the next couple of weeks. Again, if you're still in the main room, the breakout sessions have started. I'm trying to move people. If you see the more button or 4 squares or 3 dots at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to pick a breakout room from there. So if you're still in the main room, I'm trying to move people as fast as I can. If you put your requested breakout room in the chat, I can move you. To choose a breakout room, you need to go to the bottom of your screen. And if you see a more or 4 squares or 3 dots, you should be able to pick that and then pick one of the breakout rooms. Yes, for all breakout sessions, there are only 4 rooms. In this breakout session, those are listed on the page, on the screen that you see. If you're still in the main room, please just put in the chat which room you'd like to go to. I'll try to push you there. And apologies for the delay. I can take the slides down, yes. So now if you see a more button or 4 squares in the bottom of your screen, should allow you to pick which room you want to go to. Again, if you're still in the main room, this is the main room. The breakout sessions have started. If you are unable to see the breakout selections at the bottom, 4 squares or 3 dots to pick a breakout room, you can put it in the chat. I'm trying to get there as fast as possible. So there's still 15 people in the main room. If you can re-put in the chat which room you'd like to go in, I'll do my best to move you. Thank you. Nicole, you should be able to unmute if you need to. I'm not seeing other requests for people to move. Again, for people still in the main room, the breakout sessions have started. I still see 10 people. If you'd like me to move you to a breakout room, just let me know which one at this point. Yeah, Nicole, it looks like I guess a co-host can't move people manually. So if you're still in the main room, the breakout sessions have started. If you know which session you want to go to, you can just let me know. If you don't, I can put the list back up on the screen. If you don't see the 3 buttons or 4 squares at the bottom of the screen to pick a breakout room, again, just put in the chat, preferably to everyone, which room you want to go to, and I can move you there. This is the list of sessions for breakout number 1. Nicole, which session do you want to go to, if any? So if you're still in the main room, I attempted to put you into a breakout room. I'm not sure which ones you wanted to go to. If you do have a choice for which breakout room you'd like to go to for session one, please put it in the chat and I can move you there. You can also, if you should be able to see a more button or 4 squares or 3 dots at the bottom of your screen. And you can pick which, you should be able to pick which breakout room to go to. Thanks for staying on, Tony, if you're still there.
Yes, sir. You're doing a great job. Got your hands full.
Yeah. How's the audio when you're in? I had a couple of participants say they couldn't hear.
I haven't noticed an issue. A little bit when you had that blower or something, I think at your
Yeah.
site, but no,
Yeah.
generally just fine.
Okay, great. Thanks. Just to make sure, since I switched headsets, can you still hear me?
You sound great.
Wow. All right, Tony, I'm going to go to one of these rooms, so I'll be back shortly.
Okay, when I see you get back, I'll probably kick off after that, but I'll be here.
Okay, thank you. Right, so I should be able to, Tony, I should be able to pause the recording here, right? I mean, it's not going to record the breakout rooms.
Just to pause, yeah, just pause and then kick it off again. Yes, sir.
Okay.